assurance that we can provide. So I'm going to outline some required communications that we have. They're also in the SAS 114 board letter that's in front of you as well, but I will just kind of go through and summarize some of these key audit elements. So our audit planning process starts out, way before year end. We start working with Tina. We come in, we assess the district's internal controls. We do an inherent risk assessment. We form a team with experience who understands school districts, and we work with them to basically formulate a plan for our audit, right? In doing so, we calculate materiality. So materiality is an audit concept that basically notes that, if there is an error or a misstatement, right, up to a certain amount, what amount would that be to alter the users of the financial statements assessment of those statements, right? So at what level would we have to change our opinion? So that's kind of what goes into the materiality process. Our responsibility, like I mentioned earlier, is to form an opinion on the financial statements. We work for the board, but we work with management. So if there was ever an instance or something that came up when I spoke to Ms. Gale before the audit process, I said, if we came across something, we'd come to you and let you know and work through it. We did not have any of those instances this year. One thing to note, so the significant accounting policies are in Note 1 to the financial statements. So those are kind of outlined, so anyone who's familiar with these types of financial statements can pick up the financials, read Note 1, and generally have an idea of what's going on. Be able to follow and understand how things are being accounted for. So one thing to note this year, we had a new accounting standard that we had to adopt, which was Gatsby, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They set out the guidelines for the financials, right? So we had to implement Gatsby 84 this year, which was over fiduciary activities. And basically what the result of that was is our student activity funds, our pupil activity funds, used to be accounted for as an agency. So we would account for those funds, and then the remaining balance at the end of the year would be due back to those student organizations. Well, Gatsby came out with some clarification and said, okay, what control does the reporting entity have over those funds? Well, it turns out the district has pretty significant control over those student activity, pupil activity funds. For example, the chess club can't go out and buy, a case of beer and some cigarettes to go have a good time, right? They have to follow the policies and procedures of the district. Therefore, we had to shift those funds into special revenue funds, right? So normally our special revenue funds don't have fund balance. Anything's deferred out that's not spent. But you'll see this year we had to carry forward $2.7 million in fund balance for the student activity funds. You'll see that presented in the financials. Management judgment and estimates, significant amount of judgment and estimates go into these financials, right? Kind of some of the highlights there: depreciation expense, the useful life of our assets is a significant estimate. Our pension and OPEB expense, a lot of estimates go into there regarding market rates, healthcare trend costs, those type of things that are reported in the statement of net position. And our allowance for property taxes, also another estimate. Financial statement disclosures. So we review the financial statement disclosures that are management's responsibility, and we determine they're clear, neutral, consistent. Again, someone with knowledge of financials can pick up the statements, read them, and understand what's going on. Uncorrected misstatements. So that would be an error that we found that management did not want to post, that was under our acceptable materiality threshold. We did not have any of those instances this year, so no uncorrected misstatements. Corrected misstatements would be an error that we found that management wanted to record. We had none of those instances this year either. Management representation, so in the back of your board report, you'll find a copy of that, but that's just management representing that they provided us with all the information we've asked for, they're not aware of any fraud, and a litany of other things that we make them sign on the dotted line for. So there's a copy of that for your review. Disagreements with management. No disagreements with management this year. Like we said, we work through. Do I consent or not consent? Yeah, no, don't X out of it. There we go. All right. My wife would be proud of me for that. I'm just, so disagreement with management. We did not have any disagreement with management. Which management, like I told Ms. Gale before the process, if we had anything significant that we needed to bring to your attention, we would have. We didn't. And then, again, no significant issues discussed with management. So with that, Kim's going to kind of go over some financial highlights for us.
Thanks, Ford. And I know these are all as of 6/30/2021, so we're already in November, so I'm not going to harp on too many of these details, kind of it's in the past, but I'm just going to go over kind of some of the highlights. You guys have the whole financial statements in front of you. It's the big book, so if you have any questions as you're flipping through that, feel free to ask. So this is the statement of net position. This is after it's Gatsby 34 is applied, so that's when your fixed assets get put on the books, debt, all that kind of stuff. So net position deficit of $358.2 million, which seems bad, but the two big things that cause that are your pension and your OPEB liabilities, which if you look at the bottom, they're basically liabilities that are recorded on your government-wide financial statements that the district has no requirement to pay. I think we've kind of talked about these in the past, but basically just put on there so you can kind of see at the district level, if you were to have to pay it, kind of where the pension and OPEB plans stand. So if you take those out of it, you're actually at a net position positive of $230.2 million. So not as bad as it looks on face value, but just kind of keep that in mind. Next, okay, Ford, which way am I going? There we go. So general fund, I know that's kind of the main fund you guys usually look at. Total fund balance increased about just shy of $9 million to $41.6 million. Unassigned fund balance is about 17% of budgeted expenditures. I know you guys usually try and keep it around 15%, but this year, for the upcoming fiscal year, it's allowed to be, it was basically waived. So very healthy. State recommends minimum fund balance of at least 8.33%, which is basically a month of general operating expenditures, so very healthy fund balance going into the next year. And just kind of, just this slide likes to highlight some reasons why you would want to have that healthy unassigned fund balance in there. You guys can read it. I think we kind of go over these every year, but especially with all the uncertainties we've had in the economy the past couple of years with COVID, definitely a good thing to have. Your healthy fund balance in the general fund gives you some flexibility for discretionary funding needs. And the last one here, the state requires a minimum fund balance. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, it's well below what you guys have, but they do have that requirement. So always a good thing to have a healthy general fund unassigned balance. Governmental funds, so this is before all of the Gatsby 34 adjustments. So the first slide I went over was your net position after capital outlay, all that stuff is factored into fixed assets. This one is kind of what you typically are used to looking at. So revenues, expenditures, that kind of thing. Revenues of $304 million increased about $18.5 million or 6% from the prior year. The main reasons for that were increase in property taxes of about $5.5 million, which was due to some increase in assessed values, but also an increase in your debt millage rate. And then grants and contributions increased just shy of $16 million. A lot of that has to do with COVID funding on both the federal and state level. So about, I think, $12.9 million of that is related to those, and then $3 million is typical funding sources. And you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see that very well, but at the bottom we kind of tried to show a graph of how it's trended over the past 3 years. And then the federal and the state, just keep in mind, includes roughly $8 million of COVID money in federal and $5 million in state funding. And then those increases were offset by a decrease in impact fees of just shy of $300,000. So I don't know if you guys remember, that ended in, I think it was August of 2019. So fiscal year 20 had a couple months of that revenue still coming in, whereas fiscal year 21 doesn't have any. So that went away. And then your sales and services decrease is mainly due to the food service fund, most of the meals being free and reduced in fiscal year 21. Expense side of things, so expenses of $313 million, increased about $28 million or 10% compared to the prior year. Main increase is due to increase in instruction, which is what you like to see for a district. Means it's going, to the instruction of students, that kind of thing. A lot of it had to do with increased salaries and related benefits. Increase in debt service of $5.7 million. So in fiscal year 20, you guys took out an equipment acquisition bond, and the first payment of that was due in fiscal year 21. So that's the increase in those payments. Capital outlay increase of about $7.5 million mainly has to do with the construction of the district office and then starting the construction of the new middle school. And then decrease in support services of about $300,000, which most support services increase. That one's a little skewed. So school food service fund is the main driver of that decrease, which you guys outsourced to Sodexo in fiscal year 21. So that was a big cause of that. And then intergovernmental of $2.2 million. The main decrease for that has to do with the OPED plan. They have some non-employer contributions that they give out. The state does, and that significantly decreased in fiscal year 21. So those flow through your intergovernmental instead. Previously, it was like any expenses that was covering would flow through intergovernmental, but now they would have been covered in your instruction or support services, depending on where those people were coded. Next slide is, there it goes. Just kind of the other funds. That was mainly governmental funds in total, and then general fund. This is mainly your special project funds. So federal and state programs total about $36.5 million expended for about 50 programs in fiscal year 21. These funds, you're constrained by federal and state program requirements for most of these funds. And Ford already kind of mentioned this. The student activity funds are included in your special revenue funds for fiscal year 21. EIA funds, about just shy of $14.5 million in revenues and expenditures. These don't have any fund balance carryover because any unspent funds must be returned or carried over to the next year, depending on the program, if they're allowed to have carryover or not. Next slide is just some highlights in general. This one's mainly highlighting the debt. So I was trying to go over this slide and it's very confusing. So if you guys want to flip to page 50 in your report, that's actually where the footnote outlines kind of what happened in debt this year. So overall, that should say increase of $5.9 million. Sorry about that. But it increased $5.9 million, which had to do with various different things. So there was the debt refunding. I don't know if you guys remember that back in June of 21. So about $134.3 million was used to pay off like $122.3 million of the February 2014 bonds. And then there's about just shy of $14 million remaining. But so those bonds are still out there and have to be paid, but there's basically an escrow set up to pay for those. So they're essentially considered defeased for financial statement purposes. So that $122.3 million of debt comes off the books, even though it's still outstanding because there's that new debt that has the escrow money out there to essentially pay those debt principal and interest payments until it matures. And then normal general obligation bond payments of about $9.6 million, $6.1 million in capital lease payments during the year, and then you guys took out another about $11.1 million of capital leases during the current year. So this kind of highlights it, but I think if you look at the table in footnote 8 on page 50, it kind of paints a better picture of what exactly is going on. And then the last one there, you guys last year in September issued a tax anticipation note and for about $18 million, and that was fully repaid in fiscal year 21. So other than the ins and outs, there's no real financial statement impact of that at 6/30/21. And I think that's about it on financial items. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ford real quick to wrap it up, and then we can answer any questions.
All right. And on that debt refunding, we had significant interest saving over the period of the term, which is why it was taken on. So some just additional accounting matters we want to highlight. This is going to be new for this year. So like Gatsby 84, for next fiscal year we have Gatsby 87, which is a new lease standard. Publicly traded companies had to adopt a similar standard several years back. Private companies have to adopt it next year, and all of our governmental entities have to adopt it for FY22. And basically in summary, what it's doing is saying, okay, if you have a lease arrangement over 1 year, we have to put it on our balance sheet. Whereas in the past, we would have just run it through our income statement. We have to put the liability on our balance sheet and the corresponding asset on the balance sheet. So it'll impact the statement of net position. Billy's already been working on this. It's going to be a significant undertaking. There's tons of leases out there, implicit leases, stated leases. So just trying to gather all that information to assess what's going to be applicable for Gatsby 87 is quite the project. And then, obviously the accounting side of it is another piece. But just so you guys are aware, management is aware and they are working on it. And then COVID-19 funding, so just wanted to highlight some things that Kim went through. ESSER 1 and 2, this is money that was spent during the year, not awarded. So what was spent during the year was about $8 million for ESSER 1 and 2. And this program was subjected to testing under our single audit requirements, so we had to do compliance testing over the funding there. And then the CRF and LEAP funding is about $5 million during the fiscal year. And that was, the state was the subrecipient for that grant. So that money is not considered federal, it's considered state. So that was not subjected to any single audit procedures, but it was subjected to state. The state sends out their annual audit guide with recommended audit procedures that we tested on those funds during the year. So just wanted to highlight that. A lot of extra work on these two this year from the audit side for sure. And then just to wrap it up with kind of some additional compliance reporting. So we have 2 additional opinions that are required. First is under our government auditing standards. So GAS basically highlights our test of the district's internal control and compliance with laws and regulations. This is not an opinion on whether the internal controls are operating effectively. It's more about a higher level. Are they designed, and then do we have compliance with related laws and regulations? So, and you'll see in the back of the report, I don't have it, it's like the last page. We did have one finding this year there, and it was on our school bus driver testing. The state-based, or the federal government upped the percentage to 50% testing for the calendar year, but the state kind of notified the districts late on that. So we did not hit that 50% requirement for calendar year 20. For calendar year 22, we've already hit. Calendar year 21, sorry, we've already hit that 50%. So that won't be a finding next year. Just wanted to highlight that. And then the second is over the federal awards, over the controls and compliance there. So this year we tested 2 programs. Like I mentioned, we tested ESSER as one of those, and then we tested IDEA. No findings were identified there. Just wanted to note that because of the Title I finding a couple of years back, the district was still a high-risk auditee, but that will go away next year because that 2-year cycle had ended, and then there were no findings on these federal funds this year. So we'll go back to being a low-risk auditee for FY22, which in essence means we'll just have to test a little bit less. And then both opinions were unmodified there. So in summary, financial statements as a whole, unmodified opinion, and then the district's in sound financial condition as of June 30, 2021. So would love to open it up for any questions.
Anyone have any questions? Mr. Farnsworth?
I did have a couple, and thank you guys. I know that's a lot of work, and Tina and your team, thank you guys for that. The first one, the Gatsby 87, the new lease stuff in there. What, I guess as far as lease-wise, are we talking about technology? What's the bulk of it? Like our bus system, our buses from the state, are those leased? Like what types of lease agreements are we looking at?
Copiers.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I was just curious, but more from a high level, what maybe the big ticket lease items were? Copiers, okay, gotcha. Okay. The other one, and I think every year I ask about this one, and I just found it, the fee in lieu of. So I know on page 79 that was something that had to be reported. Just want to make sure I'm reading that right. So the county, in theory, we're missing out on roughly 6.7 million, page 80. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, those have been abated.
Okay. Yeah, so for I'm sure everybody, there's probably tens of thousands of people watching this at home right now. Hopefully they understand. And again, I mean, it is what it is. You know, the county is always looking to bring business and new industry to our community, but sometimes that's done with a fee in lieu of, and so that's a direct impact to the district. So we love having new business, we love industry, but that results in new people and new students, and we don't have the capacity for it, and we then on the backside of it lose out $6.7 million. So, you know, maybe at the end of the day, we probably get it 10 or 20 years from now, but it doesn't help us right now. So it is what it is. I just bring that up every year. And then the last one I had was in regards to the Education Foundation. So as part of this audit, and I know, you know, I'm reading the statements in here, I know obviously those funds are similar, we're similar entities. They help provide grants and help fund stuff in DD2. But as far as the audit goes, you do not look into their 501c3 information line, I guess line item by line item. Do they?
They do. They're a component unit to the district, so they do audit their activity. I mean, they don't look at every single line item. They test for certain materiality level, and so they did test some items in the Education Foundation. They also prepared the Form 990, so they're gathering their information to be able to prepare that tax return.
Yeah, sort of a separate team from the audit team completes that 990. And then I should have mentioned earlier with materiality, you know, we can't test every single transaction. We'd be here all day long, 24/7. That's why we have a finance department, right? But every transaction is subjected to testing. So certainly we're subjected to all of our audit procedures.
Okay. And we probably, Tina, maybe we can take it offline. I guess maybe the definition of a component unit for the district, I'd be interested to know what compromises that. So that's all I had. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Justin.
Okay, any other questions? No? I guess not then. Thank y'all very much. We love this kind of an audit. I mean, considering I think this is the first time, as far as I can remember, that we've had fund ballots that look, the percentages that look so well. So we like this. This is a happy day for us. So thank you very much.
Yep, thanks so much. And if y'all have any other questions, just reach out to Tina and we can communicate and work through it. So
Or our
thanks.
contact information's up there, so feel
Yeah,
free to
there too.
reach out as well.
Great. Thank y'all. And
Thanks.
thank you, Tina, and your financial department for all that you do for us as well.
You can have
Oh, I think we have a quick
Well,
question.
no, I was just going to say, is there a way for us to get a copy of the presentation that you just did for us? Okay, that'd be great. Okay, yes, thank you. Sorry.
Thank y'all. Okay, then I guess the next on our agenda is going to be the district test scores data presentation. Mr. Pye?
Yes, ma'am, and I've asked Dan Spink, our Director of Testing Accountability, to open it up with his presentation. He may have somebody else maybe adding to. No, you're doing the entire thing.
One-man show
Let's
tonight.
go for it.
So good evening, Madam Chairperson, the board, Mr. Pye. Thank you for inviting me in to give you a quick update on the state of affairs here as far as testing and accountability is concerned for the district. Kind of wanted to just tell a little bit of a story with the data. Data can be so dry, so we'll try to attach something to it, and that is that our end goal is always our graduation. How are we producing good community members and at what rates? So I wanted to start with the great picture that's a huge bragging point for us, which is that for Dorchester District 2, we've already announced before, but we had a graduation rate of 91.65, which really is phenomenal. It puts us overall 9th in the state, and that, of course, is including if you treated each of the governor schools as their own districts. So whether you want to do that or not, you could potentially raise our ranking, how you want to think about things. The reason why we see the colors up here on Dorchester 4 and Anderson 1 is you'll see throughout tonight that we compare ourselves to local districts and like districts. Anderson 1 being a like district, which is pretty much solely based on poverty index. And the brown will be for local, which is pretty self-explanatory. So the other thing I really want to remind here is, we can always look at ourselves relative to others versus comparing ourselves to our own, what's our own personal best. And we have to be careful sometimes when we compare ourselves to the whole group, because if the whole group did substantially poorer, but our rank doesn't change, that's great for us that our rank doesn't change, but we're still doing poor. Conversely, if we're doing better. And so we like to not only see, well, how are we doing, how is our personal best doing compared to everybody else's personal best, but we also like to take a look at our personal best. And as you can see here, starting back in the days when I was an assistant principal back in 2010, the graduation rate was 74.4. And you can see since then, we have made substantial marketed improvements in our graduation rate leading up into today. And as you can see, we had a little hiccup there in 2016-17, but other than that, it's been a steady climb. The other thing that we like to look at with our graduates is the college or career readiness status, as well as the college and career. So we actually get 4 ratings. You get college, you get career, and an or. So the college or career, meaning all of our students who are graduating are by the definition of the state, and they have some different definitions for career ready and college ready based on SAT, ACT scores, GPAs, etc. And on the career side of things, are you a GATE completer, ASVAB, WIN readiness, are you silver, platinum, etc. So in our district, we saw a little bit of a slide back. We went from we used to be in the mid-70s, we slid back to 67.5, but as did the majority of the state. So again, a great reference to this fact that our relativity to everybody else. So part of the reason for this is that this graduating class did not have, because of COVID, they weren't afforded some of the training that we normally would give the students. They didn't have access to some of the after-school programs we would normally have them to help them on the WIN. And this particular group had to do the makeup in the fall. It didn't really give them a year's time to make some improvement. So we had a little bit of difficulty there, but as you can see, we're well kind of grouped together there. So the 13th ranked is 71. We're already down at 26th ranked at 67. So just a few little factors in one way or a few little factors in the other, and we could have really changed rank there considerably. Now, when we look at the college and career readiness, we actually improved our ranking, and we're up at 22nd place this year, and with 32%, so roughly 1/3 of our students they can do anything they want. They can go to college or career. By the state's definition, they are ready for both. And so we were pretty excited about that. Although you're going to see here in a moment our results for ACT and SAT. But we were pretty excited about our college and career readiness here. And we do anticipate this going back up, although there will be a little bit of a hiccup this year. I don't know if you're following what's going on in the state, but there was a big lawsuit against WIN, which is one of the ways, the test in which we certify a lot of our students as silver, gold, and platinum. That's going away, and we don't know what test we're taking yet in the spring. So kind of hard to prepare for something that you don't know what you're preparing for. So, but we're going to do our best there. So one of the things before we get into testing that I really want to take a moment to touch on is that in a normal year, pre-COVID year, the state has a requirement that we test 95% of our students. And when you think about it, in our district, with our high, severe and moderate special ed population that we have, which is a little bit more substantial in other districts, they already account for about 2%, 1% to 2% of our students that will never test. And we don't get to take them out of the equation. They're part of that 5%. So even with COVID, with all the craziness, with all of the VA and the home and people not wanting to bring their kids in, et cetera, we still, on our SC Ready, which is the biggest test for math and ELA for grades 3 through 8, tested 94.5% of our students, which I think is remarkable. So we were literally 1/10 off of the normal mark. And we're normally about 96.2%. So we only tested roughly 2% students less this year than we did in years past. So we're very excited about that, and I think we really need to acknowledge we had a lot of assistant principals spending a lot of time after school, giving up their Saturdays, tracking down kids at public libraries to make them feel safe and to make it convenient for them to be able to test during all throughout the year last year. They really did a phenomenal job.
Can I ask a question about that? What are the consequences for districts that don't test the 95%?
So last year, the consequence was waived. In a typical year, you would lose your 1 overall rating status. So if you were overall excellent, you'd be dropped back to good. So that's the punishment. So yeah, you don't want to lose your rating. So you're highly motivated. But that was just a sample. When we look at Iowa COGAT, KRA, PALS, all the EOC, those were all above 95%. Matter of fact, for most schools, they were testing 98 to 99% of their students for those tests. So they really did a phenomenal job, and I want to make sure we give that shout out. And it's also important because you see there how well ranked we are now. I didn't want to go too much further because as soon as you get to about 40th place, it starts to drop off. With the last district testing somewhere around 36% of their students. So when we do some comparisons this year, it is a little more difficult to compare. And a lot of the districts that are above us, you'll note, these districts that are close to us are actually pretty close, like Clarendon 3 with only 648 kids in the district. And a lot of the top 20 are smaller districts that have 800, 1,000 students. So it is interesting for a big district to be at 94.9%, I think is pretty remarkable. So how did we look? EOC, so across the state. Well, now this one is a little different. These are our graduating seniors, okay? So it doesn't matter when you took the EOC. You could have taken it as a freshman, sophomore, junior, potentially even as a senior. And we do have some kids who move in from out of state because of our testing system here, end up having to pick up English 1 so they can take the test. It does happen. That we had 75% of our students earning an A, B, or a C, and that put us across the state relatively there at in 6th place. Okay, and again, you got to think about whether you want to count the 2 governor schools as being their own districts. As far as our Algebra 1 is concerned, we were ranked 19th across the state with 54% of our students earning that A, B, or C. In biology, again, this is that cohort. We were 9th across the state with 59% earning that A, B, or C. And in U.S. history, we were 8th across the state with 46.4% with an A, B, or a C. So again, there you can see we're relatively grouped of once you take out the governor's schools, everything kind of becomes a little bit more of a herd there, right? The data is a little closer. The basic standard deviation is a little bit smaller. So, but we're very proud as to how, and this year, really kind of 2 years got affected there with this cohort. So we're happy that how we're doing compared to other districts is remarkable, being in the top 10 there. Another thing we want to point out when we compare ourselves is one we're particularly proud of is with our multilingual students, perhaps one of the most challenged subgroups that we have. We're very pleased that each of these students is given, it's a little complicated, but they're each given an individual goal based on some state criteria. And we had 49.5% of our students hit their individual targets last year, which ranked us over in 3rd place overall for the district. So All of our students who are coming here speaking a language other than English, we are getting 50% of them to meet the growth goals as the state indicates that we should. And then bringing it back down, so we started off in the high school, bringing it all the way back down. Now we're going to take a look at SC Ready and SC Pass, which is grades 3 through 8. And we can see here that in ELA, our performance ranked as 10th across the state, in math 27th, and in science 22nd. So overall, again, still very competitive with what's happening with other districts. As you can see there again, like districts, Charleston kind of edged us out there just slightly. The District of Greenville and Anderson School District 1, who being the like districts. So this is just, again, taking a look at the state averages. And as you can see, starting in 2016, with this particular assessment that we've had, we have always beaten the state average. We've already been discussing in principals meetings. We don't like seeing something that's not highlighted in yellow. So as you can see there in 6th and 7th grade in math, this is the first time in a long time that we've fallen below the state average. But in all other areas, all other grade levels, we are well above the state average. And you can also see the difference, how much we fell to how much the state fell. So where we're falling, again, that comes back to that relativity, right? So if we're all gaining or all losing at a similar pace, that's giving us an idea of where is our bell curve moving as opposed to where the state's bell curve is moving, whether they're gaining an achievement or losing an achievement. So, yes.
I apologize. If we can go back to that slide real quick. And I really, I don't want to be negative at all, and maybe I just don't understand this slide. I mean, it looks like you're comparing to the state as a whole, correct, on the right
correct.
side?
So these numbers, so this number here is our difference from 2019 to 2021, as opposed to the state's difference here.
Okay.
And then, so we can see our difference. So how did we drop over the two different testing sessions compared to how the state dropped? It's the state as an average, as if the entire state were its own district.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And again, this is where I have to bring up, we have to remember that not every district tested to the same percent that we did. So some state or some districts where they are testing 30, 40, 50, 60% of their students, we have to ask ourselves, well, had they tested whole, would we have seen different numbers out here? How would their performance have played out?
Yeah.
So
Can I
it
ask
comes
you
with a
something with
huge
that?
caveat.
Who determines, does the district, the state, who determines what the percentage is?
So the state in normal years gives a 95% minimum for all districts, but given that we were in the COVID year, they waived the 95% participation.
Gotcha, okay.
If you remember, in March of 2020, we had some very conflicting messages from the various state agencies, and everybody interpreted it very differently. Another very important point to make here is that in our district, we also did not change our stance on, for example, the EOCs. We still required them to be 20% of a student's grade. Other districts reduced that. If you can remember, you had to make the board decision whether we were going to make that change. Some changed them to 10, to 5%, or some of our neighbors to 0%. So we don't really know the students. Again, if I'm a student taking a test, if I even showed up to take the test, and I know that this test doesn't count for me, how well am I performing on that test? And then what effect does that have on the overall state scores, rankings, et cetera? So again, that's why I say it's nice to know that we're in the top 10, but not everybody showed up necessarily with their full teams. So it's really hard to be able to assess were we better, were we worse. At least we have, like I try to tell people, at least we know that we're headed north. We'd like to know north-northeast at 7 knots. We don't know that. But at least we kind of have a general idea of where we are to where other districts are. And in previous years, I'd be able to tell you north, northeast, south, southwest. Unfortunately, this year, I'm not comfortable saying that what you're seeing is concrete or is reliable.
Well, and I was going to say, the way you explain that is perfect. And if I look at this slide, I would, if I'm you, I would put a huge asterisk on there. Because
Yes.
again, we, as a district, we are going well above and beyond what other districts, I think, are doing across the state. And so it's really not even a fair comparison.
And when you look at the differences, you also
It's
have to be
not.
careful too
It's
that
upsetting
we
to
had a
me.
lot, well, also we had a lot more to lose. So when you look at the state, when they're at 49 to dropping to 43, well, we were at 61. So it's all fruit, but you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples.
But it was based on parent opt-out. They let the parents opt out. We had to send several notes home by the teachers in the schools reminding parents that was what the State Department of Education and the governor's office and others had decided would happen. So some districts really pushed maybe that. We didn't. We were fairly neutral, and we weren't going to make people take the test, but we had so many of them in virtual academy in places. We had 9,000 students there. A lot of them were 3 through 8, and they just didn't want to come into the school because of the safety issues, number one. So there were a lot of reasons besides just we don't want to be bothered with it, but it's not fair to even our teachers and others to plan when we don't have an accurate picture. The test itself is flawed, but then when everyone's not taking it around the state and not in our own district, then it's hard to put some validity to the scores.
And again, how well does a student concentrate when they're taking it at the local library on a Saturday? How well does a student take it when they are coming into the school and they may be fearful of COVID? Is their mind focused more on that than on the test at hand? Another point to make too is that while we have some higher differences, it does appear as though if you look at our differences and the state differences, oh my gosh, we lost so much more in the state. But keep in mind that even with all of our losses, except for 6th and 7th grade math, we're still higher than the state average.
Well, and I don't know if the data is easily accessible. I'm assuming it is. You could almost add a column in here showing what our testing percentage was on the South Carolina Ready test versus the state average. And I think if you added that column to show, hey, we've got 90+% of our kids taking this test. The state average is whatever. Let's just say 50. That's not apples to apples.
I was actually going to ask that too. Is there that information out there, the number of students in
Yes.
South Carolina or the percentage overall? Does the state put that out
I
there
don't
that
think the
tested?
state, I don't think the state, I would have to take the previous slide here, and I probably have to do some, finagling on the, oops, I'm going the wrong direction. I don't think the state gave us an overall percent, so I'd have to somehow go in here and add up all the students possible and divide by all the students possible to get an overall state score and then disaggregate that by grade. Could be done. That would be interesting. But again, about the asterisks, we thought about the asterisks, but our principals don't really understand asterisks. They just see numbers. They don't like negative numbers. I could have, 3 footnotes next to it. They're still going to attack it. It doesn't really matter why. So that's why we opted not to put the asterisks there. All right. So also just taking a little bit more of a look at how do we stand compared to everybody else. Here you can see our local and our like. So when we looked at kind of what we've already looked at with our ELA, of course the yellow is when we're ahead. And in math, you can see we lost a little bit of ground there compared to some of the others. But when you look at our ELA, for example, this is overall. If you took 3 through 8 and you put them all together, how would it compare to everybody else's 3 through 8 combined? And when you look at, Charleston and Greenville literally just knocking us out there by 0.1 and 1 point. So we're right in the pack with the districts that are like ours and even locally. Same thing with our English 1. We have a lot to be proud of there. Again, sweeping the whole category for local and like. And Algebra 1 not far behind that. And then science having also a very strong showing. The social studies has not been part of the accountability program for the last 2-3 years, but we keep it there in anticipation that it will potentially come back. And as you can also see there, we're doing very well in our biology and U.S. history across the board.
Some of those districts were face-to-face the entire school year. They weren't out for all the things we were out for and missing all the time. And yet again, our district, who were in school half the time, still topped them. So just want you to make note of that. And there, of course, we saw that in several places around the state where that happened. So we feel that that was because our teachers taught their backsides off trying to do what they had to do. We couldn't get a whip out and whip them any harder. And our kids performed well, considering the large numbers that we were told were struggling with virtual. Large numbers were unsupervised in their homes, and no one was making them follow suit. And teachers couldn't get their arms around them, smile with them and encourage them. And children, especially young ones, relate so well to those gestures and that push that was unable to be done. So either that or we really made up some time when we did go face to face in late February. I mean, we must have burned it up because we did quite well with that piece. So we were pleased, and it had to say the level of teaching and also our pacing charts and all the things that we use, our literacy math models and all have to be very competent and very strong for us to stay paced with what we've done in the past and not be any further behind than that for the year and a half that we basically suffered with trying to give instruction to terrible situations and the changes that we had in schedules. And we went from one thing to another, to hybrid, and then to the other, and it was a lot on kids and a lot on parents, and of course even more so on our teachers, and I felt they should be applauded for that.
And so just also, in case you're wondering why we keep looking at EL as its own subgroup, it's because the state, as part of the accountability program, looks at them as a separate entity. So they're the only subgroup that the state separates out as far as the accountability system goes, just in case you're wondering. And again, as we've already talked about this evening, we did very well in that category, in that indicator, being third in the state. So we really did well compared to our local and like districts. Again, same thing with graduation. We did very well compared to local and like. Our dropout rate, as you can see, is still phenomenal, and it has been phenomenal in the last 7 to 10 years. It's been pretty much 1% or less. So we're very proud of that fact that we remained have a very low dropout rate. And again, the college and career readiness, we've already talked about that, but that just gives you kind of a different view as to how we're stacking up compared to the local and like districts. And again, we're doing exceedingly well across the board. Okay. So this is going to transition to how are we doing compared to everybody around us to doing what we do best, I think, which is we're just concerned about how are we doing, what's our personal record, how are we stacking up to what our standards are in DD2. And so this is the English end of course for all of the various tests that we take. This analysis is a little bit different, and that is not the cohort. It is just simply who took the test this one particular year. So as you can see in algebra, the historical numbers there for the last few years, and they did switch around between 2016 and 2017, the assessment. Hence the performance changed a little bit. But we're really only 1.9 points off our pre-COVID performances. The English one, we have a dot because that was a test that's being phased out, and we only had 10 students in the district who still needed to take it. And English 2 is what's being phased in, and of course we have no comparative data because to ourselves, as this was the first year that we took English 2 that was not a piloted test year. Biology, as you can see, we're only 0.9 off of our pre-COVID performances, and our U.S. history dropped back a little bit there with a change of 5.7. And again, you can kind of see that our change in U.S. history is kind of similar to the change that you can see in South Carolina, We didn't drop back as much in biology compared to South Carolina. And again, I would ignore that English one. And the algebra, where we dropped back 1.9, the state dropped back 2.5. So we're still sticking with pretty close to our pre-COVID performances, and we're pretty thrilled about that.
What, if you don't mind me asking, it looks like 2015, 2016, what started happening? Because I just see a trend.
Yeah, they changed the EOC. The vendors changed, what's the word I'm looking for? They reformatted, they upped the rigor. That's when the state came out with some of their new goals for, was it 2028 and 2038? And so, yes, we did see a change of standards. I think this is also right around the time, is it with the ACT tests and all that, we changed the format? Yeah, so these few years here from 2012 to 2017 were fun years because the bar was
back and
always,
forth, a lot of changing,
the
yeah.
assessment was always moving.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And then we always want to look to, again, we talked about our college readiness. We want to know about our ACT. And again, this one is for our 11th grade cohort. So just the 11th graders who took it this particular year. So these are our, this is from last year, so our seniors this year. Here are their mean scores, because we're always trying to figure out what areas can we improve in. And if you haven't already picked up on it, math was definitely the weaker area as opposed to ELA. And that we can see reflected here, but we still did very well with the reading and the science portions. And then if we want to look at the ACT, and how are we doing across the various benchmarks or the various categories, we're doing very well in English, reading, and science, but you can see again there a little slip in math. And when we look at the SAT longitudinal, we see here definitely a drop. We had more students take it last year than in years before. We don't really know whether this, having SAT prep opportunities definitely can make a difference, but we're not going to fool ourselves to believe that it didn't have something to do with time on task, instructional opportunities, et cetera. So this is definitely one that we're digging into a little bit more to try to figure out. And it's definitely one that has been a little bit more elusive over the years, the SAT. Also keep in mind, too, that students have choice. So some years they basically take either the SAT or the ACT based on their personal decision. And we try to coach them. We know that some students who are more apt in certain areas, we try to push them a little bit more towards the SAT. If you're more well-rounded, we try to push you towards the ACT because that includes science and social studies. So there's some coaching that goes on there. But I know that if this group were like my son who went through, he just graduated last year, and I know that a lot of the students, once they caught word that colleges due to COVID weren't really requiring you to take SAT, ACT, you could only imagine what that went to the motivation of let's brush up on this before we go in and take that. So we have to wonder to what effect that has. But again, please don't let this quip here influence you into thinking that we don't take it seriously. We do, and we're looking at that, and they provide us a lot of sub-scores that our interventionists are looking at and diving into to try to figure out what specifically about the SAT were the students not performing well in. Is it the trigonometry? Is it the calculus? Is it the geometry? Is it the algebra? And we're trying to dive in and figure out what we can do to shore that up. And the students, as a senior, do have another opportunity to take that this year. So it's not, they're not doomed. They can definitely pick that back up and take it again during their 12th grade year. All right, so again, comparing ourselves to us, this is our ELA for the South Carolina Ready, which is the 3 through 8. And what we're seeing here are, again, comparing our performance to our performance. The 3s and 4s we lump together because those are considered met, and that's how the state, when they're doing the accountability, that's how they lump them. And so we're interested in seeing that. And So in third grade in ELA, we saw a loss of around 10% of our 3s and 4s, about 9% for fourth grade, about 6% for fifth grade. In sixth grade, less. So in middle school, the ELA was less of a loss, with only losing 3.3. In seventh grade, 6.7, and in eighth grade, 7.3. Now, the math, as you can imagine, is a little different story. So in the early grades there, third grade, we lost 14%, in fourth grade, 17%, and in fifth grade, 12%. So this goes back to, remember earlier, we're still doing very well compared to districts across the state. But this is where our principals lose sleep at night, because they're worried about how are we doing for our DD2 standards. And they see these numbers, and they're definitely spending a lot of time in PLCs trying to figure out what to do. And also in sixth grade here, we're losing 16%, seventh grade 10%, and in eighth grade 14%. So it definitely had an effect on our math across the district. Now, all this being said, we opted this year, kind of a little bit nudged by the state, but we opted to go with a new formative testing program in the district. And it's called, it's NWA, which is a nonprofit group that puts out MAP Growth as one of their products. It's been around for 20-some years. Back in our day, we used to have it. We moved away from it because they didn't give us some of the nitty-gritty data that we wanted, and we moved over to RIMI, and as did a lot of other districts, and that woke MAP up, and they have stepped up, and they have sort of not only matched RI and MI, but have gone maybe potentially 1 or 2 steps further. And so we're very excited to be bringing this on. And it's going to be a great tool for teachers. We've already done our first round of testing, all of the training, and for the most part, we are hearing just raves about when you'll see in a moment what it is, the tools that they have. But let's talk just for a moment here a little bit about MAP. And I got a little bit of statistical humor in here. It's dry humor, I know, but don't be mean, be above average. Again, so mean scores, you're going to see that in a lot of definitions. It's just that 50th percentile is the exact medium on that bell curve. So keep that terminology in mind as we're moving forward here. So one thing that's really nice about MAP is that it is a national and internationally given assessment. And they do all of their norming based, these norms are all based on national performance. So we're now getting an opportunity to see how do our kids stack up to other kids across the country. And so we get a lot of data, which I'm not boring you with tonight, but I did want to touch on this one, which is, this is the mean Ritz score. So the Ritz score we'll talk about in a moment is basically your number, just like an ACT. Everybody has their scale, that they give it a name. So MAP says Rit. And you want to see the blocks building like this as you go up on each grade level. But as these numbers go up, you ask yourself, well, yeah, but is 176 good for grade 2? And so then that's when you got to come over here to this chart. But look how wonderful what MAP does for us. They say this is where your kids should be in the fall, this is where your kids should be in the winter, and this is where they should be in the spring. And so all of our teachers, you're going to see in a moment, are getting wonderful information about every individual student on where they should be, are, and need to be. So this one you can ignore. This is one that we use. This is like the overall health of all grade levels, K through 5, if we were to come up with one mean. MAP doesn't have a normed equivalent for that for the nation. But that will help us next year when we say, okay, well, we were 170, my site is going here, we were 179.7 for our elementary. We're hoping next year when we start in the fall to be 180 or 181 and be slowly getting better over time. So that's where that number will come into play. And again, you can see here for middle school and high school. So where the real information here is, so let's take a look at our map. Let's take a look at math. All right, I started with this one first because this was the ugliest one for us to look at. But you can see that the mean, we are in grades kindergarten, first, second, and fourth above the national mean. And another thing I want to point out is this was normed pre-COVID. So if COVID had never occurred and I was standing before you today, I could still sit here and say that our students in those grade levels are performing above the national average. So again, that helps to put our math problem in perspective. Because you're going to see in a moment, South Carolina is quite rigorous in its exam. And when you also see here the difference for all the other grades, we don't like seeing negative. But I want to draw your attention over here to the standard deviation. This is the plus minus factor, right? So to be in the norm or to be in that average group compared to all your compadres across the country, you could be somewhere, so let's just take 6th grade, for example. You could be somewhere between a 198 and a 230 roughly. So that's a pretty big span from that mean score, right? We're only off lower single digits. That to us is pretty encouraging that our kids are coming back in the fall. They just tested early October, and they're where we want them to be as far as on the national level. And when you get to our ELA, I'm not going to bore you by explaining this to you again, but you can see the numbers, and you can see, of course, the national norming, and look at what's happening here in ELA. We're very encouraged by the fact that we are really outperforming that national mean score.
Can you tell us a little about how they came up with that national mean score, what it's based on?
Right here, math growth basics. So this test is adaptive. Every kid across the nation will take this test, and it is not based on your grade level. Now, it starts you on the grade level that you're registered in the computer for. And if you're doing well, the sky's the limit, and if you're not doing well, there is no floor. So it's going to drill up or down until it finds out where are you. And that's kind of what this is showing, is that it starts you here, and as you guess, it increases the rigor, and as you start to miss, it decreases it, and it keeps doing this until it kind of figures out where you are. And then this last one is what's going to give you your Ritz score. And because it's not based on a grade per se, now they do align their standards with the typical grade patterns, and then they do align that for us here in South Carolina. So even though we're getting the same questions across the nation, so they're norming us there, they're still tweaking things a little bit for South Carolina when they're suggesting where those kids are for our grade levels. So what's nice about this is that if I'm a 5th grade teacher and I have a student who comes in and they're really only at a high 3rd grade level, and I move them considerably, I can see them move. And we can, especially this tool is going to be very important for us these next couple of years as we talk about the catch-up with COVID. So we're going to really be able to see individual growth on every student. And it is so much easier to get that data now. Matter of fact, most principals can bypass me, and they can go right to the MAP software themselves and pull this information and have it for themselves. Every teacher can know that, I need to move Mr. Farnsworth, 5 points, and the next student 6 points, and the next, it'll estimate for them what student how far should they be moving on average. So they can look out and see, well, there are 1,000 other Justin Farnsworths across the nation, and after a year, how much growth did the average Justin have? And it was 8. So then now the teacher knows, okay, I want 8, and of course our teachers, I want to beat 8. I wanted him to grow more than that national norm. Right? So we're very excited about that scale. And this is a little bit small, but you have the printout there in front of you. The only thing I want to point out here is that when it comes to rigor, when you look at, this is another thing that's a great tool that teachers now have on hand, and that is that they can now see where we need to move students. And as you can see from the rigor, to be meets in South Carolina, they say that you need to be in the mid-60th percentile or higher. That's pretty rigorous compared to other states. So we know that we're up against that, but the numbers do align. In other words, when you look at our percentages and what percentiles they fit in, and the percentages that we went over earlier, where we saw some of those drops, with how many kids getting the 3s and 4s, they do line up extremely well. So we feel very confident that the information that MAP is providing us is pretty spot on with the historical data of what's been playing out in South Carolina over the last 20 years with the districts that have been using this information. So we're happy to be on board with that. I'm going to pause it.
So did they, and again, I know you were talking about kind of norming that across the nation. So is it a true statement? So let's just say math, third grade math. I'm assuming across the nation, you got 50 states, the standards are probably different all over the country.
So every state's assessment, every state's SC Ready is different. In some states, you might only need to be in the 50th percentile to be passing. In some states, maybe you need to be in the 80th percentile. There you can see where the percentiles are to be meets, or in the mid-60s. So we know, but what's nice now is we know where we need to move our kids. There's no more guesswork. We've been, MAP's been around for so long, and it's tapped into so many millions of students. Their data points, their algorithms that they're running are pretty spot on. It will always be the exception. But we now have a pretty good indicator of where the kids are and what they need.
And so this is outside of South Carolina Ready, or is it using the
So
Ready?
this is saying, okay, so our nationally normed performance, when you look at South Carolina students who are nationally normed, where they fall on SC Ready, where do you have to typically be on the national norm, on that national scale, to be meets in South Carolina? So to be meets in South Carolina, you have to be in the mid-60 percentile and above.
But what are they're basing that off of, so you're saying this test has been around,
So
and they've used it, it's been
Right,
used?
so they're not basing their test off of SC Ready. SC Ready is its own independent test.
Sure,
and they're-
but
yeah.
their numbers, what are they basing those off of? That, you're saying that's something?
They're basing that off of 20 years of
Testing
thousands.
across the country,
So
nationwide.
their map growth is tested all across the nation. Of course, SC Ready is only tested in South
Right.
Carolina. So they take the two and they lay them over each other and they say, okay, well, what kid typically meets the standard in South Carolina to be a 3 or a 4 on that test? And you have to be basically in that mid-60th percentile to be meets. So South Carolina's got some pretty high standards. And again, that's kind of what they did when they were rewriting their goals, when they came up with the whole college and credit. A lot of the accountability program that we have now, that's been in place for about 7 years, was all that big shift. When you were asking us, well, there was that big shift in all the score, that's when all that happened. And South Carolina said, we're gonna set rigorous goals for our state. We want our students to perform. We're gonna set the bar high, and here we go.
So do other districts in the state use this new testing system that you're using? Do you know?
Roughly from what we can tell, about half of them use MAP. And about another 25% on top of that half use MAP, but maybe not in the same capacity. They might use it only for special ed populations or only for middle schools.
Okay.
But the state has now limited us. There's only 3 vendors that we can pick from. And we vetted all 3. And after hearing the districts and seeing what they can do, Charleston County, for example, has been using MAP since early 2000s, Beaufort County. So we sat down with them. They showed us what could be done. And we felt that MAP was tried and true. There's another product out there that was also solid, but they didn't have the longevity, they didn't have the long-standing data, so we opted for MAP.
So is it replacing what
It's
we're doing?
replacing RIMI. RIMI is
replacing
no
RIMI.
longer an option in South Carolina.
And we've already started, you said we administered it in October?
That is
And
correct.
what grades again?
K through 9.
Nine. Okay.
And our teachers liked it so much that we're going to be offering it to our 10th graders this year so we can get a better pulse on where our 10th graders are. Because again, as we're going to talk about that growth, that catch-up is going to be so important. So just to give you an idea of how powerful this tool is, I'm not going to belabor it too long, but I'm pretty excited about it. These are all the different reports that a teacher has right at their fingertips, even at home. They can just pull this up. It takes them to basically an app, a website. They can pull all this information up, and they can get class reports. So if I'm a middle school math teacher, I got 5 different classes. I want to know what are the strengths and weaknesses of the class in general. They can pull this up. They can see what is the mean Ritz score for this class compared to the district mean Ritz score compared to the nation's mean Ritz score. It starts breaking down all sorts of things here. Where are your kids in the different quantiles? Are they in the lowest, the average, the above average, the high? Every student, and that's where we're going to talk about how we stress that we have been in our district, since I can remember, and every year it gets better on how we bring the data down to every individual student. We schedule on every individual student's data. Most of these principals out here are hand scheduling these kids, and they have got massive spreadsheets. I know I use the same one where you can see 2-3 years worth of RI data, SC Ready data. I mean, you can see it all, and we color code it. We've got some ITs that are great, and they help us do all that, so we can see, are you yellows and reds? Are you straight reds? Are you green? It really helps us to know what we need to do in place and for interventions. And I just think it's powerful now that here we can see what is their Ritz score, what is the average growth, what are they expecting. All that is going to be spelled out for them. Individual, we haven't used them yet because, again, we're just very familiar, and we don't want to send something out that our teachers don't feel very adept at being able to explain themselves. Although we've had some teachers already asking permission, they love it, they want to use it if they parent conferencing, so we know that they're excited about it. But individual student profile reports, we're going to be getting some training in January from MAP on how to bring students into the fold and make them responsible and make them knowledgeable about their data and how to use it and how to with the whole growth mindset. The class breakdown, people are always wondering, well, so you have all this data and you tell me you use it as an individual, so how do they break this down? So if I'm a teacher here and I want to teach language arts versus math, so if I'm a elementary 3rd grade teacher, this already groups my class, and don't worry, all the names you see up here, these are all the fake classes, so I'm not, there's no FERPA violations or anything, you can rest assured. And so they can look across these Writ Bands and see, so what kids should I group? And then on top of that, they can go to, I don't have another one report here, I should have, it's probably perhaps the most powerful one, but they can see these Writ Bands, and if I'm a new teacher and I'm like, well, I don't really know a kid who's around a 181 when I'm teaching language arts, what does this mean? They can go to another part of the app that will tell them, these kids, this is what they need help with. These kids in this group, this is what they need to help. I mean, it is spelled out that I am not a 4th grade teacher, but I feel pretty confident that with this, I could go in there and at least do a halfway decent job in knowing what I need to give each kid and group them for our stations, for our one-to-one, for our virtual, how we make our groups, how we do our rotations. All of this is going to be extremely powerful information. And teachers were doing this before, but they had to do a lot of this crunching and grouping manually. This program takes care of all of it, and the teachers, they need all the help they can, all the time back that they can get. And so if they don't have to crunch these numbers, that's great. And then again, student growth summaries, I'm not going to belabor it, but that's really what this is all about and why it has us so excited. We know, now that we know what every individual student's growth goal is, we want to exceed it, and we know that if we can, we will get them, that the achievement will come and it will come back. So again, we're thrilled that overall we're in good standing across the state, but that's great. That's still not DD2 standard. We want that DD2 standard, and this program is going to help us to get there. So we're very excited about that, and I'm excited, of course, because it brings a lot more data into it.
Are there, so getting into to what you were saying there at the last part, are there integrations from this program into our existing programs and initiatives? They can say for the teacher, hey, Johnny needs X instruction, that's automatically pushed to them in one-to-one individualized learning?
Yes, so they can do some, there are other components that we could potentially add on later that wasn't suggested to dive completely into the deep end the first year. But take, for example, students in middle school who are on Edmentum. Edmentum, again, normally a student would have to take RI and then sit down with Edmentum and take Edmentum's initial assessment. And then based on that initial assessment, Edmentum would say, okay, well, you need these particular instructional units. They don't have to take Edmentum's assessment anymore. Edmentum is linked with NWA. I take one assessment, it populates Edmentum for me, it populates Study Island, which we use in elementary school, and it populates several other programs that we will now potentially lean towards because it's not to have to keep testing those students over and over and over. Now again, we haven't abandoned AIMSweb. AIMSweb is another very powerful formative tool that we use. So when a student is flagged for being significantly below their grade level, we want to know that, okay, MAP's not enough. We want to dive in more. That student would be hooked into AIMSweb, which is another level of diagnostic that's going to help us figure out if there's a learning disability, if there's dyslexia, and a lot of those other indicators that potentially are troubling for a student.
Can I ask a quick question too? Because I'm not sure I understand this, but with the new maps, the old, but we're using, how often do the numbers evolve? How,
So
daily?
three times a year, so
Okay.
fall, winter, and spring. And as you can see, they're normed for each administration. Matter of fact, I'm getting nerdy on you here, but we didn't test until the 6th week of instruction. I was able, that was the average, right? So about, basically like the 4th week to about the 7th and a half week. So I'm able to go on the computer and say, this is the weeks of instruction that we took. It norms us to where the nation is when all the kids are 6 weeks into instruction. So we're not getting a false bump by being 6 weeks in, being compared to everybody who only took it in the first week of instruction. No. We're getting true data as to where our students are.
Thank you.
And are those assessments, those are taken on their laptops?
Correct.
Okay. What I was going to ask earlier, do you foresee in the future rolling up or providing, say, some of those high-level reports for the parents as an addition to, say, report cards?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. But again, we're hesitant because we're not going to throw anything out there that DD2 hasn't put through our tests and making sure. And again, we have to build some capacity. We want to make sure, before we throw data out there, we want to make sure that we build capacity with our parents. So probably some steps that are going to need to take place will be some parent evenings, maybe some videos the parents can watch so that they can better interpret. I know a lot of the elementary schools want to use this when parents come in for conferencing so that you can have that face-to-face conversation. Because again, we don't want to just send data home. A parent sees this chart and then they just think, helter-skelter, everything's going, the plane's going down when it's not. And when they see projections, we need them to understand they're just that, they're projections. There's multi-causational, things can change. So we want to make sure that we do, slow and steady will win that race, but we're just excited that the tool is available to us. And the other thing I want to point out is I know that a lot of people are very concerned about our gifted and talented students. You often hear, there always seems to be the concern on the lower end. They can't hide anymore. So every gifted and talented student is going to take this test and they are going to get their number. And those teachers are now, we can now, there's the whole thing of when it's only achievement, a teacher can hide behind the achievement. Not that any teacher hides, but if the kids are scoring high and they continue to score high, well, but how do you know whether you really added a value to that student, whether you took them and moved them the projected amount of growth? That's going to be flat right out for those teachers now. They now know that Justin's capable of moving 7. He's not going to just rest and hide behind his achievement and do what he needs to just score and only grow 2. No. I now know that, no, Justin, you need to step it up because I need you to score 8. Matter of fact, I want you to score 10 or 12 because I want you to move up that percentiling. That's where we want to be. We want to move our bell curve to the right, to the higher achievement side. So we're excited that this will literally help us with every student. Yeah. Well, we're excited, and I know the principals are excited because, it hasn't been that long since I was out of a building, but the group behind me, I mean, they are definitely excited about it to have this and not have to wait. So they can actually get stuff before I can, because I have to wait for the testing window to close. Literally every day after the kids test, they have to just wait one night cycle, and they can start pulling student reports and information on all of that. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Pye, did you have anything you needed to add?
Nothing else except, again, to tell you that we realize that we've lost some time, and we've shown areas that we think we know we've done a lot better than we thought. There's still areas like math, which is a national state concern also, and all the other districts, but there's so much room for improvement. So we have been spending lots of time, the last 2 or 3 principals meeting, the district staff meetings. We have continuously looked at ways to analyze this data using these map reports to see how well we can drill down, and finally checking with other school districts, seeing what they have. We're analyzing our curriculum to make sure we're not giving teachers too many things to play with and not keeping it focused on the areas that we have already decided need desperate reshaping. So with all that in mind, we're meeting tomorrow with our principals for a half a day over at the auditorium, the Performing Arts Center, and we will be doing just this. We'll be developing goals for how we're going to attack, and strategies, which we already have out there. It's there, but we're going to finalize them and put them down as an action plan that we will take back to the schools, the principals, and this will be our roadmap to recovery like we like to do it. So it's going back to the Dorchester District 2 standard, and with the information we now have, we feel that we can go even beyond that as we feel the sky is the limit, and we've got a lot of catching up to do, and I think it's just a matter of how much can we get done in the time that we have, at the time that we can get after school, weekends, and do the summer that based on what we did last summer. It's going to be a continuous process, and for some children it's going to take longer, as it's always taken longer before a pandemic. So with the pandemic, we've just really layered it on even more so, but all of our children, including our gifted and talented, have room to stretch and to grow. And so we're going to be looking at children more individual than ever as we differentiate the learning, but we also try to realize that we have to teach all our children on grade level standards. But what about the kids who are 2 levels behind? We still got to catch them up if we think they're going to have a fighting chance doing it on grade level, which is where they'll be tested. So we've got a lot before us, but it's not a hurdle that we've not had in the past. It's just not this awesome and across the board like it is now. But with what we've been planning, and we're so excited about tomorrow's meeting, that I feel that we're ready to go, and many of our schools have already jumped out way ahead of us, and so it's a matter of getting everybody on the same lane and then turn them loose and say, how fast can you go? So we're going to leave it up to them. We trust their judgment. We just want to give them what we feel is a recipe for success, and let them add the ingredients that they want, take out the ingredients that they don't feel they need in their particular site or with all their students. And I think that will be working with their faculty, letting the faculty have ownership in the decision-making of what decisions are made. We're reviewing the PLC, where they will be talking within the grade levels and the faculty to try to determine as a school what we're doing as a district. And then they'll go back in their team meetings that they have. They will work on debriefing, a process that we brought to the district some years ago that was a major success. We're bringing it back with a vengeance, that we talk as a group. So if there's a beginning teacher that has not had the experience, they don't need it. They've got a team of wisdom there with them that's going to guide them. And we're hoping that the veteran teachers and the ones that's been in our district will help make that happen. We'll hope that administrators and their coaches and facilitators and assistant principals will make themselves available to attend every single planning session for the next couple of, maybe month or two, ever how long it takes, to make sure each team has developed a plan. And it's specific to what the district likes to see in our goals, the school's goals, as well as that teacher's individual goals, all incorporated in her plan so that we can watch and monitor through the MAP testing our progress, and MAP will give us a predictor of how we're going to do on a test scoring. And we have that after we give the last one. We probably have about a month before the state testing begins, and that's when our teachers will be on the runway trying to perform miracles, because they will have in their hand exactly what's predicted, and we don't accept that. We want to go beyond that, and we always believe we can out-teach the predictions. So that's where we are. We're excited about tomorrow, looking forward to it, and tonight was just perfect timing for us to do this as we move into the next phase. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, this is great news. Thank you, Mr. Pye. This was a very good meeting. I do want to ask one question before we move on, though. We had talked about at the last board meeting about the district office and our auditorium for our new boardroom.
There has been a
Do we have
snag. We should have, hopefully, it straightened out by this week, but we don't want to take a chance to announce we're meeting Monday and have to try to reach people the weekend and Monday say not. So Monday's meeting will be here. We really truthfully believe that's the last one here. We have a problem with one of the handicap seats that came in. It's not fitting, so unless everything's there, they're going to limit that. We've got some and that should be fixed tomorrow, the next day. So that'll make it by Monday, we feel. And so OSF is not a problem. Now it's the date of the technical stuff. They can't hook up the technical stuff officially till this is moved over there. And we've been reluctant to move it because we have not received it from OSF.
Right.
She was given the third-party stuff on Friday, and we were assured we would hear about it on Friday, but as of this time on Monday, she has not called to tell us. The third-party person's already told us it's been highly approved. There's no issues with him. So unless she decides she wants to come herself and see it and schedules an appointment at a later time, that's the only setback we can have. But she pretty well told us when she was here last time, and she's done this with us before, and allow a third-party person to sign off for us, and somebody that she, admires and respects, and she'll stamp it.
So I guess we'll just wait until Monday to get an update.
I hope
to
Monday
find
we can
out.
tell you Monday the actual specifics about the next meeting, being there at the auditorium and the things that we're having.
It's not like we're excited to get over there or anything. That's not the reason why I keep asking these questions, but anyway.
I think you're going to enjoy it when you get there, make it real nice.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we give everybody out there who wants to attend the meetings the opportunity to
notice.
make their plans and that kind of thing. So we'll wait to hear back something on Monday.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for asking, because I was supposed to have told you that before we met, and I forgot about it.
That's okay. Okay, so with all of that being said, I need a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mr. Guthrie, seconded by Mr. Farnsworth. Any discussion? All in favor? 6. We're adjourned. Thank you. Everyone have a great evening.